Hello folks, greetings from a particularly wet and miserable February in the UK. Like most people, I've been spending a lot of time indoors to avoid the weather, and like most normal people, I've been spending a lot of that time thinking about the Sumerian King List. You might be familiar with it from the half a dozen or so times that I brought it up in the past on my channel, but if not, here's a quick bit of background. The Sumerian King List is a name given to a collection of different documents written in Sumerian that have been found across Mesopotamia dating from between the late 3rd millennium and the early 2nd millennium BCE that purports to hold a list of rulers and dynasties that successively held the kingship of Sumer dating back to the beginning of mortal rule in the region. If you're unfamiliar, Sumer is the bit of southern Iraq that wasn't underwater at the time. You might have seen pictures of the most famous version, the Weld Blundell Prism, kicking around online, which as far as I can tell is actually one of the latter versions of this document to be compiled. What you probably haven't done though is try and sit down and actually read through it. I did for the sake of this video, and I gotta tell you, it's a wildly interesting document. In addition to referencing your more standard Mesopotamian mythology stuff like the Flood story and figures such as Gilgamesh, it also features a dude who flew to heaven on the back of an eagle, rulers whose reigns lasted for millennia, dozens of kings that might be invented whole cloth for all we know, and sprinkled in amongst them, there's also a few historical kings of the period that we actually know something about. Except for you, Iana Tomb. As Dr. Gianni Marchesi notes in an excellent 2010 paper, it's also a strange document by ancient Mesopotamian standards, in that it simultaneously manages to be mostly secular in content, for example, no gods are involved in these transfers of kingship, and also constructs a largely mythical history of the region that later came to be known as Babylonia. Indeed, it's now recognized by most Assyriologists that this document is more a work of political propaganda than any attempt to create an actual history of the region. Whilst the earliest surviving copy of this list dates back to the Ur-3 dynasty around the end of the 3rd millennium BCE, it has been argued by scholars such as Peter Steinkeller and Gianni Marchesi that it originates in the period of the Akkadian Empire, between the 24th and the 22nd centuries BCE. According to this line of thinking, this document could have been used to legitimize the reigns of Sargon of Akkad and his successors, presenting the region of Sumer that they had conquered as one that had always been previously unified under a common king. The reality though is that prior to the exploits of Sargon's immediate predecessor, Lugal-Zaggisi, Sumer was instead split up into a bunch of city-states of roughly equal size. At times, various loose federations may have existed between them, and some local city kings may have exerted wider power throughout the region, but archaeologists have found little sign of any centralized ruler throughout most of the 3rd millennium BCE. Interestingly, one of the kings or ensies who may have achieved some sort of verifiable unification of the region was the previously mentioned King Eannatum of Lagash, but he only unified it for like 5 minutes, and he's not even on the king list, so who cares about him? This list of kings also changed quite a bit over time, with it apparently being rewritten to suit the bias of whichever ruler it was produced under. So yeah, it's not that useful as an accurate reflection of Sumerian history, but it is bloody interesting as a political work, and as a reflection of how Sumerian rulers tried to portray their own history. Reading through it though, there is one figure on this document who stands out from all of the others. Whilst it contains dozens of different kings across many competing dynasties, only a single woman is named on the list. After a series of entries for a dynasty based in the East Syrian city of Mari, we're told that their final king, Karam-Ettore, was defeated, and the kingship was assumed by a woman named Kubaba, who founded the 3rd dynasty of the city of Kish. According to later versions of the king list, Kubaba, or Kubao, or Kubabu, or Kuba-Abu, or Kugbawuk, or... Look, different Assyriologists have weighed in with all sorts of interpretations of how her name should have been pronounced. The reasons behind this are way too complicated for me to get into here, so I'm just going to go with Kubaba, okay? According to later versions of this list, Kubaba doesn't seem to have been related to any pre-existing royal dynasty, and instead, she has much more humble roots. To quote the text on the Weld Blundell Prism,
"In Kish, Kubaba, the woman tavern keeper, who made firm the foundations of Kish, became king."
Whether or not she was considered a legitimate king, or simply just a figure who exercised kingly power, seems to depend on the text of whichever list you consult. Whilst the Weld-Blundell prism is very clear that she was, and refers to her using the kingly title of Lugal or Big Man, another version of the list found at the southern Iranian city of Susa is somewhat ambivalent about her status, claiming only that she ruled for an uncertain amount of years without naming her as king. Meanwhile, another recension found at the city of prefaces her entry by saying that, quote,
"As for Kish, there was not a king."
Whether she was considered a legitimate king or not, most sources still ascribe to her an impressive, if improbable, reign of 100 years. Unfortunately for her though, she wouldn't found a lasting dynasty. According to the king list, at the end of her reign, Kish was defeated by the more northern city of Akshak, where either 5 or 6 kings would reign for roughly the same amount of time combined as Kubaba. In a remarkable turnaround though, after this, power would be restored to Kish under her son, Puza Suen, who reigned for 25 years and successfully passed on his position to his son Ur-Zababa. Whilst Ur-Zababa would be the last of Kubaba's descendants to supposedly hold the kingship of Sumer, we are told that he reigned for 400 years, which is a pretty solid performance by the standards of the mythic reigns found in this document. It's through her grandson Ur-Zababa that Kubaba's story also intersects with legends surrounding another famous ruler of the period, Sargon the Great, founder of the Akkadian Empire. According to Sargon's entry in the king list, he began his life from the fairly humble origins of being a gardener for Ur-Zababa, later becoming the king's cupbearer before he would go on to achieve rulership himself. In later tales surrounding Sargon, Ur-Zababa would act as an early antagonist figure to the future king, repeatedly trying and failing to kill his servant through underhanded means. These stories are far too expansive for me to cover today, and Kubaba only really has a tangential relationship to them. But still, it's pretty cool to see her descendants causing trouble for the future conqueror of Sumer and Akkad. There's a ton of other cool stuff in the Sargon myths too, so let me know if you're interested in hearing more about them in the comments, and maybe I'll cover them on the channel at some point. The question that we're going to examine today then is, was this ancient Sumerian king-queen actually real? Was there really a Sumerian girl boss kicking around ancient Mesopotamia, showing all these boring male kings what it really means to rule the land of the 2 rivers? Well, before we try and answer that, we're going to take a quick journey from one of the world's earliest civilizations to a glimpse at a world after civilization. That's because today's video is sponsored by Hungry Minds, the book, the ultimate guide to rebuilding civilization. So say I'm a guy in the post-apocalypse. My Wi-Fi's gone down, the electricity and water is off, and unfortunately, I'm a YouTuber, so I have no applicable skills to surviving in the real world. If you swap me out with some random dude from Kubaba's time, I'm pretty certain they'd have a better shot at surviving than me. But thanks to the inventions contained within the book, I should have more than enough information to survive this situation. Whether I want to start a fire, purify water and learn to find food, or if I'm ready for more advanced survival techniques like setting up my own pigeon mail system, building a submarine, or reinventing psychotherapy. But seriously though, the book is designed to spark your own creativity, deliver rare knowledge, and inspire deeper thinking. This beautifully laminated hardcover volume is printed on premium quality paper and holds over 400 pages worth of knowledge, covering a blend of history, science, art, and design, all brought to life by unique illustrations combining medieval art styles with the precision of engineering drawings. This internationally best-selling work was a top Kickstarter project, and more than 50 different creatives were involved in its production. On top of all the wonderful creativity that went into it, the thing that I enjoyed the most was the sense of humor that this book has about itself. Like how in addition to more day-to-day inventions like how to craft a spear, how to bake bread or provide basic medicine, there's also instructions on how to get started on making a power plant, construct your own perpetual motion machine, and even how to equip yourself with your very own coil gun. If only Earnatum had had one of those, maybe he could have sneaked his way onto that king list after all. So if you're interested, click the link in the description or scan the QR code on the screen now to purchase your own copy, and make sure to use the code Histocrat for 10% off. Getting back to our core question, did Kubaba really exist? Well, in the mid-20th century, a few scholars were open to this possibility. In his work, Women of Sumer, W. Hallow would note that if the traditions surrounding her are to be believed, then she could be considered the world's first recorded female monarch, as she would likely precede the similarly dubiously attested 6th dynasty Egyptian pharaoh Nitocris by more than 2 centuries. Julia Asher Grieve would simply describe her as the reigning king of Kish, although one whose reign length should be considered as legendary, whilst W.G. Lambert would distinguish the historical Kubaba of the king list from descriptions of her life that are found in later sources. It should also be said that her description of having been an innkeeper, a landlady, or a beer brewer is a plausible profession for a woman from these times. Whilst women were likely considered less equal than men throughout most of Mesopotamian history, we know that they were involved in all aspects of Sumerian society, be it religious, commercial, or domestic. Throughout this history, they are known to have pursued many different professions, which did include brewing and keeping a tavern. Female innkeepers are also mentioned in multiple documents from at least as far back as the 2nd millennium BCE, including in both the Epic of Gilgamesh and also the Law Code of Hammurabi, indicating that they probably occurred quite commonly in ancient Mesopotamia. There was even a patron goddess of beer making called Ninkasi, or the mistress who fills the mouth, who I'm pretty sure a lot of people watching this would have been worshipping if they lived back in these times. More recently though, Assyriologists have increasingly dismissed the idea that she was a historical personage. In the Sumerian world, Claudia E. Sutter argues that the inclusion of an innkeeper on the Sumerian king list was designed more as a mockery of the power-hungry kings of Kish than as documentation of an actual historical figure. You see, the part of my discussion about innkeepers that I previously kind of left out is that they also seem to have been seen as immoral figures by the rulers of the time. According to Martin Stoll, writing in Women in the Ancient Near East, innkeepers' premises were generally considered areas of low moral character, acting both as brothels and as centres for criminals to gather. Indeed, the female innkeeper in Hammurabi's law code is mentioned as a part of a law requiring her to hand over any criminals she finds within her establishment to the proper authorities. Luckily though, Hammurabi was a kind and enlightened ruler for the time, so you won't be surprised to learn that the penalty for failing to hand them over was a minor slap on the... death. Stoll also notes that in some lists of professions, the word for innkeeper could also have been synonymous with the word for prostitute, which if correct could add a whole new level of intended mockery to Kubaba holding this profession. Claudia E. Sutter even goes so far as to explicitly describe her as a brothel keeper, to support the idea that this could be some form of ancient mockery or satire. While Stoll himself does not directly make this connection, he is part of the group of scholars who are very dismissive about the historicity of the accounts we have on Kubaba. As further evidence against her existence, we should also note that whilst Kubaba appears to have been relatively popular in the later chronicles, she belongs to the vast majority of rulers on the king list who have no independent archaeological evidence that backs up their existence. In fact, as discussed by Gianni Marchesi, only 7 rulers from before the accession of Sargon of Akkad are known to have independent inscriptions confirming their existence. Interestingly, these include Enshaku-Shana, a rough contemporary of the previously mentioned Eannatum, who did succeed in making it onto the king list. Somehow he managed this despite his city having possibly been conquered by Eannatum during his reign. Man, just what does that guy have to do to get on there? The finishing blow, though, to the idea that Kubaba was a historical figure comes from Gianni Marchesi. In that 2010 publication I mentioned a while back, he argues that a Sumerian ruler with this name existing at some point in the early dynastic period simply isn't possible on linguistic grounds, as the opening element of her name, Ku or Kug, isn't known in any documents dating from that time. Quote,
However, her name would represent an anachronism in the ED period. In point of fact, the name type Ku-Gdiri name is not attested before Ur-3, and most probably represents an onomastic innovation of that time.
Given all these different factors then, we should probably err on the side of caution and assume that Kubaba is a purely fictional character. But even if she didn't exist, she does stand out from many of the rulers on the Sumerian king list in that she is mentioned in a few other sources throughout Mesopotamian history. In particular, her name's associated with various Omen texts dating from the Old Babylonian period, which is roughly the first half of the 2nd millennium BCE. These omens were associated with the practice of haruspexy or heptoscopy, a type of soothsaying where divinations were made from examining the characteristics of a sheep's liver. On the whole, these omens portray her in something of a mixed light. On the one hand, some of them characterize her as a warrior, describing her as the Kubaba who seized the kingship. To quote one of these omens,
Omen of Kubaba, the beer brewer, arise and accept the bow of battle.
At the same time though, both Karen Radner and Martin Stoll argue in their respective works that other omens of Sumerians would have considered ruinous, play on her nature as being an aberration from kings normally being male. To support this, they point to a text known as the Omen of Kubaba, that associates her with the birth of people with both male and female genitalia. Quote,
"If an anomaly is provided with a penis and a vulva, the omen of Kubaba who ruled the land of the king will go to ruin. If an anomaly is provided with a penis and a vulva and has no testicles, a courtier will revolt against the king."
From these, Stoll argues that the uncertain gender of any resulting child was seen by Mesopotamians of the 2nd millennium BCE as opening the door on such a child becoming king, a reflection of Kubaba's own unnatural seizing of male kingship. Given the combinatory nature of this omen, this could well have been the case. I should point out though that such a link is not stated explicitly in the text, and Stoll also speculates in an earlier work of his that this may be referring to the birth of a sheep rather than a human. Oh, and it's also thanks to one of these omens that we find out what may have been her eventual fate as a ruler, where it is implied that she met her end at the hands of her own children. To end on a more positive note though, there is another later chronicle that explains Kubaba's rise to the kingship. This account comes to us from a poorly preserved document known as the Weidner Chronicle, which exists in 3 Neo-Assyrian and Neo-Babylonian copies. Whilst this document is often termed a chronicle, it actually contains a propagandistic letter that was supposedly sent by the 18th century BCE king Isin-Damik-Ilishu to the king of Babylon Sin-Muballit, who coincidentally was Hammurabi's father. This document outlines the behaviour of a series of rulers throughout Mesopotamian history who made sacrifices of fish at the Babylonian god Marduk's temple, the Asa-Gila. As a result, its narrative does have some anachronistic elements, given it presents the Babylonian god Marduk as the head of the Mesopotamian pantheon during early dynastic times, rather than the contemporary supreme god Enlil. It's probably best to think about it then as being a bit like ancient Mesopotamian fanfiction. Partway through its tale, we are told that during the reign of the king of Akshak, Puza-Nera, a group of fishermen from the temple who were catching fish as an offering to Marduk had their catch taken away from them by officers of the king. Roughly a week later, the same fishermen instead take their catch to the house of the tavern keeper Kubaba, and whilst part of the narrative is lost at this point, she apparently provided them with bread and water and ensured that the fish were brought to the temple as intended. In reward for providing the offering, Marduk then bestows upon her sovereignty over the entire world. As with the king list, we can be pretty certain that this story is entirely a work of fiction, the result, as Martin Stoll puts it, of a millennium of rambling about old folk stories. Still, it's fun to hear a few more details about her as a folk figure. So that's Kubaba. I'll admit that when I started researching this video, I was a little worried that I wouldn't be able to find much information on her beyond her single appearance in the king list, so I was pleasantly surprised to find out how much archaeologists have actually discussed her. And hey, whilst we didn't find any evidence that she was an actual historical ruler, at the bare minimum, she does appear to have been a figure within the wider folklore of the time. That's more than we can say for most of her contemporaries on the king list. Oh, and one minor little extra detail before we finish the video today. Some archaeologists think that she might have been a goddess. Yeah, I probably should have brought that up a little bit earlier. To be fair, this is going to be less dramatic than I just made that sound. Instead, it's probably more fair to say that some archaeologists used to think that Kubaba could have been linked to a West Syrian goddess with the exact same name. Or at least, I think they used to. I couldn't find any examples in my sources of people suggesting this, but from the way they talk about it, apparently it used to be a thing. To give some context, this other Kubaba was initially the chief goddess worshipped at the city of Karkemish on the border between Turkey and northern Syria. According to Karen Radner, this goddess was first attested in the early 2nd millennium BCE, roughly half a millennium after Kubaba's supposed existence, and she appears to have been a civil goddess of some uncertain character who may have been linked to birds or fish. It was actually quite hard for me to find any information on her attributes. Maybe it's one of those classic examples of where she was so well known by people of the time that no one actually bothered to write down what she was known for. Later in the 2nd millennium BCE, she would also be adopted into the Hittite and Hurrian pantheons, with her cult surviving as late as ancient Greek times. Nowadays though, most scholars dismiss the idea that there are any links at all between this goddess and Kubaba. As noted by John Hawkins, the chronological and spatial gulf between these two figures is simply too large for us to assume any direct link between the two. Instead, Kubaba's name is more likely to be derived from the fairly standard practice of Sumerian rulers having descriptive names that were written to venerate a particular deity. In this case, the southern Mesopotamian midwife deity, Baba, or Bao. According to Douglas Frayne and Gianni Marchesi, the element Ku or Kug means radiant or silver, and her resulting name can be translated as something like the radiance of Baba, which is an appropriately pious name. So in summary, Kubaba, probably not a real king, probably not a goddess, but definitely very interesting. Thanks for watching all the way to the end of the video, folks. Hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff. And if you want to help support the channel long term, consider backing me over on Patreon. My next video is probably going to be on cave art, again, somehow, so check in next month for that. My name is Charles, and I'll talk to you again soon.